All right, well, we are going to get started. I do see people are still logging in, but we're gonna get going. Good morning. Thanks for being here with us today. Today we have Joseph Ellis of CoNetrix with us again today. He was with us last December and did a social engineering training that was really well received, and he did such a great job. I asked him to come back today to provide a presentation regarding the NCUA's Information Security Examination Program, also known as ISE. That is a risk-based approach to examining and supervising credit unions. So obviously something that's very, pertinent to all of our credit union shops. Joseph is going to cover topics including general info about ISE, levels, components, statements, primary areas of risk, ISE drivers, and more. I just want you to know, as I had sent out emails, this course will be able to earn one continuing education credit. So I'll be noting the attendance once Joseph starts for those who are logged in for the duration of today's training, and then we'll get back to you with that training credit, proof of that training credit. Again, Joseph Ellis is from CoNetrix. CoNetrix is a full-service computer networking security and compliance firm built on the principles of integrity, innovation, and initiative. They specifically serve financial institutions as well as enterprises requiring a high level of security in their operations. Joseph has experience performing IT audits for community financial institutions, with technology woven into his professional work experience for over 20 years. And as part of the Boost Consulting team, he assists financial institutions in developing and maintaining their information security program, including business continuity planning, ISO support, risk assessments, cybersecurity policies, and vendor management. Before I turn it over to Joseph, just a quick note about today's format. We ask that you hold your questions till the end of the presentation. There's the chat or Q&A box found at the lower right-hand corner of your screen. You can send your questions in during the presentation, that's fine, but we won't get to them to the end of the presentation where the time is allotted for that. And the other option is you can always raise your hand at the end and I can unmute you and you can ask Joseph yourself. But again, we'll wait till the end of his presentation. We have time set aside for Q&A. And with that, I am going to hand it over to you, Joseph.
All righty. Well, thank you, Erica. I think obviously just these few seconds into my talking, I'm obviously from West Texas. Saying things like alrighty and howdy, how you doing, stuff like that. But I'm glad to be back. It's nice to be back with everybody virtually. Usually when I do presentations, it's live. It's to a live audience. So this is a little bit unusual for me, just talking into a camera, but we'll make the best of it, shall we? Of course we will. Well, let me turn on my presentation here and we can get started. We're calling this session reintroducing the ASET and the ISE or the ICE. And I kind of put in parentheses kind of reintroducing, just because there's been a lot of turnover and turmoil in the NCUA's examination procedures over the past few years. And we thought it'd be worthwhile to say, okay, where are we now? Where have we landed? What do we have to work with today? So we're going to reintroduce the ASET and the ISE. So let's forge on ahead. Just quickly, a little bit about me. I am Joseph Ellis. I'm the manager for our Boost Consulting team here at CoNetrix Security. Been married over 20 years. We have 4 kids. And something that I like to share is that this is my 3rd career. This whole information security world is the 3rd world in which I have set up camp. My first was that of a registered nurse. I was an RN working in critical care, surgical intensive care. That was a lot of fun, a lot of stress, a lot of ups and downs. Really neat part of life. I learned a lot. And then I was a landlord. I owned rental properties, and I Was the landlord, I was the owner, I wrote the paychecks, I did the staffing, I did the accounting, and I did all the repairs and maintenance work. So I had the jeans and the steel-toed boots and the tool belt, and I was hanging sheetrock and fixing leaky pipes for 15 years. And now here I am at CoNetrix as an information security consultant. Just real quickly, about us as CoNetrix, we are a family of companies. These 4 companies here are all under the CoNetrix umbrella. We have accountingware there at the top. They develop accounting software. Wouldn't you know it? CoNetrix Security, that's where I am. This is our group that does our audits and our pen tests and our boost consulting. Started here at CoNetrix as an auditor. I was an IT information security auditor for about a year before moving over to Boost Consulting, where I am now. Our other companies are CoNetrix Technology, which is network management, managed service provider, all those sorts of things. And then finally, Tandem. Tandem develops our Tandem software, an online suite of information security management software. And then just real quickly, we have our standard disclaimer that says this presentation is for information only. It only contains my opinions. If I say anything crazy or weird, that doesn't necessarily mean that CoNetrix agrees with me on that. And this presentation is proprietary from us. All right, so let's talk about what we're going to talk about. First, everybody's favorite. Everybody likes to start their day with a history lesson. That's what we're going to do. We're going to talk about sort of ancient history all the way back to 2017, which in this industry, that's a good number of years, and a lot of things can change, and a lot of things have changed. We're going to get into a comparison of the ASET with the Information Security Examination, the ISE, and we'll talk more about what those two things are. We're going to dive deeper into the ISE itself and talk about how it's built, what it consists of, what it comprises, the levels, components, and statements. And then finally, we'll wrap up with some key risk areas for us all to be focusing on, things that, in fact, the NCUA is going to be focusing on for 2024. Excuse me. So here we are, almost halfway into 2024, but that's still important information to have. So let's continue with history for fun. And I do kind of chuckle, I do kind of laugh, because in this industry, in this world where we are information security, here we are today, 2024, you go all the way back to 2017. And that's kind of, you start talking about, like, did we even have fire then, or had anybody invented the wheel all the way back in 2017? My goodness gracious. But starting in 2017 for today, what we're talking about today, 2017 and prior, NCUA exams were sort of vaguely, semi-officially known simply as Part 748 exams. And they were conducted in an effort to maintain compliance with the requirements that were set forth in CFR, the Code of Federal Regulations, Title 12, Part 78. That's the section that talks about credit unions. And so these exams up until and through 2017 were simply known as Part 748 exams. Some of you may be familiar with that or may remember that. In 2017, the NCUA began piloting the use of what they called the automated cybersecurity examination tool, which was an Excel spreadsheet that the NCUA adapted from the FFIEC's cybersecurity assessment tool, the FFIEC CAT, which came out in 2015. The NCUA adapted that, used the content from that. NCUA is a member of the FFIEC. And so as a member of the FFIEC, they took that content from the CAT and adapted it and kind of tweaked it kept the content the same, but put it in a sort of a different package for credit unions' use. And they called it the Automated Cybersecurity Examination Tool, the ASET. And so, as we said, in 2017, they started piloting that as a shift away from the Part 748 exams. And in 2018, they began using the ASET effectively as their examination tool. And in fact, that's what it was called, the examination tool, the Automated Cybersecurity Examination Tool. But then sort of retroactively by 2020, we start seeing language from the NCUA saying, no, that we were benchmarking. We were benchmarking credit unions. We were seeing where credit unions' cybersecurity preparedness levels were. We were just benchmarking all this time. And those of you who were being examined during that time, you might say, no, it felt like an exam. But officially, the NCUA says, no, that was a benchmark time period. We were just seeing where everybody was by using this ASET. And then in 2020, the ASET's use as an examination tool was suspended as the NCUA started desiring to transition to a more formalized examination framework rather than this, again, at this time, Excel spreadsheet. And so they transitioned the ASET to the ASET. They changed it from the ASET to the ASET. They changed it from the Automated Cybersecurity Examination Tool, and instead they wrapped it in a new desktop application, a separate standalone piece of software that they renamed the Automated Cybersecurity Examination Toolbox. And have told everybody that this is a voluntary tool that credit unions can use to assess their cybersecurity preparedness. It's completely voluntary, wink, wink, with an asterisk at the end of that. And that continues to this day. That ASET toolbox, that ASET application remains available and in use today. So back to 2020, recall that we said that in 2020, the NCUA wanted to transition to a more formalized exam platform or exam framework. So what did they try next, starting in 2020? Well, in 2020 and 2021, which this was just a few years ago. You remember 2020? You remember what was going on then? Well, in 2020 and 2021, the NCUA began piloting the use of what they call the NCUA CU, which was based on the FDIC's NCUA, the Information Technology Risk Exam, NCUA. And they adapted that and they harmonized information from the FDIC and the Federal Reserve and a lot of state regulators. They blended that together into what the NCUA called the NCUA CU for credit unions, of course. But that was relatively short-lived. And by September of 2021, the NCUA stated that the NCUA CU would not be permanent. They were not going to be using this as a permanent exam solution. And wouldn't you know it, in 2022, they actually shifted back to the old Part 748 exam. So you may remember, of course, I don't know where you are along this path, but you may very well remember sort of the turmoil and sort of the uncertainty. You know, what are we doing this year? What's the exam going to look like next year? And the NCUA, they were working on it. They're trying to land somewhere, doing their best. So in 2022, we shifted back to that Part 748 exam platform. But also in 2022, the NCUA began piloting again what would be known simply as the Information Security Exam Framework, the ISE. Some people call it the ICE. I can't quite do that. My brain doesn't quite do that. I usually call it the ISE. the information security exam. And beginning in 2023, just last year, this became the exam framework of record, of authority. This is what we're using today. This is what the NCUA is using today for their information security exams, simply the ISE. So today, we primarily have these two tools available. The ASET, which is still going, still an active thing, still a usable tool that, again, is completely voluntary, wink, wink, as well as the information security exam, the ISE. So let's sort of, and there are other things available. There's other tools and resources available out there. We'll mention some of those as we continue, but these are the two primary tools in the toolbox. So let's highlight some differences and some similarities between these two tools. So first, I keep sort of chuckling and saying that the ASET is completely voluntary. And that is literally verbatim. That's what the NCUA says. It's completely voluntary. It's a self-assessment tool that you can use in your credit unions to assess your cybersecurity maturity level. It's just up to you. It's not an audit. It's not an exam. It's a self-assessment. And it is a valuable tool in that regard. Whereas the ISE is official. It is the official examination framework used by the NCUA to conduct your information security exams. So next, the ASET has fairly limited flexibility in that it is the same assessment regardless of your credit union's size or complexity. Now, I say it has limited flexibility. It does have some flexibility in that it helps you identify your cybersecurity maturity level. Ideally, you'll at least be at baseline cybersecurity maturity. But then, if your environment is more complex or more sophisticated or more advanced, you can indeed show compliance or matching up with higher levels of cybersecurity maturity, evolving, advanced, innovative. You get up into innovative territory. I call that the Star Trek territory. That's where you're doing time travel and all sorts of things like that. So there's some flexibility built into the ASET, but it's relatively limited. Whereas the ISE shows much more flexibility and scalability in that the examination itself actually changes depending on your credit union's size and complexity. Now, which version of the exam do you get? It depends on asset size, and it also depends on your examiner. That's kind of up to them. And you can talk with them and debate with them if you want to. But this scalable choice as to which exam version you receive is primarily, first and foremost, based on your asset size. And we'll talk about that here in just a minute. But the point here, a key point here, is that thankfully, both of these do provide some flexibility. They're not necessarily one size fits all. There is a little bit of flex there, and even more so with the ISE. And finally, the ASET, having been based off of the FFIEC's CAT, which was originally released in 2015, the CAT was in 2015, it's really starting to show its age. The content that is in the CAT and the ASET is getting pretty dated. In Boost Consulting, when I help folks walk through the CAT or the ASET, sometimes, there are some points along the way there where we kind of chuckle. You're kind of up in advanced territory, and they'll say, do you have XYZ control in place? And we say, my goodness, was that considered advanced back then? That's really common nowadays. Or vice versa. Back then, there were some controls that were kind of on the horizon that we were thinking people were going to be implementing that we've learned nowadays. No, people are implementing those controls. That was just that was a neat idea, but nobody's really doing that. So the ASET and the CAT are starting to be kind of dated, whereas the ISE, by nature of its newness, it just started being officially used last year in 2023. Of course, it's much more up to date with modern practices and recommendations. And to my mind, it's much more holistic. It observes a much broader picture of an information security program as a whole than does the ASET. It paints a better picture in my mind as to what an information security program can and should look like. So that's sort of the comparison and the contrast between the ASET and the ISE, the two tools, the two active things that we have today. So real quickly, let's talk about what got us here. What are the things that fed into or influenced the development of this ISE, this Information Security Examination framework? First, obviously, the ASET, we've talked about that. The ASET and the CAT, the content of those tools fed into development of the ISE, shaped it. It's not the same content as the ASET, but the ISE was indeed shaped by that. Secondly, of course, Part 748 and 749, the part of the Code of Federal Regulation that pertains to credit unions, obviously, of course, that's going to feed into and shape the formation of the ISE, as well as the FDIC's NCUA and the NCUA's NCUA CU. We talked about that, those examination frameworks. The NCUA is still in use today amongst the banking world, and the NCUA had that NCUA CU for a short amount of time there. That's a valid piece of information, an important stepping stone on the way to the ISE. Of course, the FFIEC's booklets, their IT handbook, which I always laugh, the handbook, the IT handbook, like you're going to be carrying that thing around in print, as well as all the individual booklets that are 20, 60, 80, 100 pages long. But that's sort of our Bible in information security world for financial institutions. We especially in Boost Consulting, we lean heavily into those FFIEC booklets for guidance. And the NCUA did as well as they developed the ISE. The NCUA leaned on its own information, its own content that it has developed over the years in the form of supervisory letters. And the reason we're bringing these up is because I want you all to be aware of these resources. These are still very valid, very meaningful, very usable resources and tools and repositories of information that are quite valuable. And they were used in the development of the ISE. And then finally, sort of a catch-all, just unicorns, unicorns and rainbows and anything else that was valuable and pretty and helpful in developing the ISE. Lots of smart people out there with lots of really great experience and comments and questions and yeah buts, caveats. All sorts of resources like that were used in the development of the ISE. Any number of influences there. So I want you to be aware of those resources. Unicorns are quite intelligent and can be helpful in lots of situations. You can just Google them. That's silly. I apologize for that. Moving on. So now that we've talked about some history and some all these different tendrils and tentacles and resources and streams of information that have fed into the formation of the ISE, let's talk about the ISE itself. The information security exam. How does it differ from the rest of your exam? What are these two different exams now that we've got? What's the deal here? Another way we could say that is what part does the ISE play as part of your overall NCUA exam? So first of all, According to the NCUA itself, they say that all federally insured credit unions receive an NCUA examination on a periodic basis. Okay, that can be that periodic basis. That time frame can be anywhere from 12 months to as many as 60 months, as much as 5 years for some state chartered credit unions. But all federally insured credit unions receive an examination periodically, according to the NCUA. And to ensure both compliance with applicable laws and regulations and safety and soundness, a review of the credit union's information security program is performed at each examination. So we see two different elements here. And this is a direct quote from the NCUA. See that we have two separate elements here. We have the more broadly scoped NCUA examination as a whole. Every federally insured credit union is examined, as well as the review of your information security program done as part of the examination. Okay, so they're not two separate things. They are two things that go hand in hand. You've got your overall exam, as well as the review of your information security program done as part of that. So just real quickly, I want to highlight some of the risk areas, the 7 general risk areas that the NCUA is concerned with your general exam. And you're probably familiar with these, but I want to highlight them quickly here, just so that we can be mindful of them, just so we can have them in our brains this morning as we learn more about the information security aspect of the exam process. So these 7 general risk areas, we have credit risk, interest rate risk, liquidity risk, transaction risk, compliance, strategic, and reputation risk. And again, I imagine that you're all very familiar with these, but I want to get this idea of risk in our minds as we move forward through today's presentation, because as we dive deeper into the information security element, we see that, again, according to the NCUA, they say that the NCUA uses a risk-focused approach to examine your information security and to provide examiners flexibility to focus on areas of material current or potential risk relevant to each credit union's unique circumstances. So this is where we get into scalability, flexibility, risk-based decision-making. That's the name of the game in information security, is risk-based, risk-focused decision-making. Not every environment is the same. That's why we have terms like size and complexity. And thankfully, the NCUA recognizes that, and they say that we want to use a risk-focused approach. We don't want to have a one-size-fits-all examination platform. Not every credit union is the same. So being risk-focused means that the ISE, the Information Security Exam, this new platform that the NCUA is using, can be applied at one of 3 scales or levels, depending on your credit union's size and complexity. So let's mention those briefly, these 3 levels of the ISE. The first is called the Small Credit Union Examination Program, or the SCUEP. One of our other presenters here at CoNetrix, Alyssa, she calls it the SCOOP. And again, my brain can't quite do that. My brain says SCUIP, which sounds silly. I know SCOOP sounds better, but my brain says SCUIP. But anyway, this is the Small Credit Union Exam Program, and this is for credit unions with an asset size of $50 million or less. Of course, a credit union of that asset size is not going to have the same information security program as larger institutions, larger credit unions. And thankfully, the NCUA has recognized that and said, hey, if that's where you are, if that's where your credit union is, we're going to use the SCUIP for your information security exam. The next level is called the core. And this is basically for everyone else, all the other credit unions of $50 million or more. This is larger, has more questions, more scrutiny, more intensity. And we're going to talk about the numbers here, and we're still going to be pleasantly surprised as to this level of scrutiny, this level of intensity as compared to what we've had in the past. But obviously, we have more room on this screen, so there must be a third level. And yes, indeed, there is, and that is simply called Core Plus. This is for more complex credit unions that may be engaging in what we might call riskier practices or complex sorts of things that your examiner may deem worthy of more scrutiny. Doesn't necessarily mean that you're doing anything wrong or bad or sinful. Just means, hey, maybe you're being extra innovative. Maybe you're pushing the envelope of what credit unions typically do. Maybe you're embracing new technologies or offering less common services to your members. Your examiner may opt to use elements of the Core Plus program to allow them to do deeper dives into particular areas of your organization. And again, doesn't mean that you're doing anything wrong. It doesn't mean that you're being punished or whacked with a stick. It just means that your examiner feels like, hey, we need to look deeper into this, and that's perfectly fine. So we're really impressed to see that this ISE has these three levels that, again, are primarily based on your asset size, with the option of adding some extra parts and pieces as needed, depending on your complexity. So what are these parts and pieces? What are these things that make up the ISE? Well, they are called components. We have this chart, this table that shows the small credit union exam program, the SCUIP, the core, and the core plus. And we can see which of these components or these categories or these buckets are included in each of those exam programs. These are, if you're familiar with the ASET or the FFIEC CAT, these might look familiar to you. These are analogous, at least, to the 5 domains of the CAT, of the ASET, these 5 areas, these 5 categories or components of the ASET. These here in the ISE are very similar to those domains or those categories, and we can see that they've been sort of expanded. One thing I want to draw your attention to, right in the middle of the list, cybersecurity controls. We see that there is explicitly for the small credit union exam program that there is an explicit cybersecurity control component, whereas there is not one for the other 2 levels. And you might say, well, that doesn't make any sense. That's weird. Well, of course, they're going to be addressing cybersecurity concerns for larger credit unions, but the way they do that is just throughout the rest of those categories. They didn't want to burden the smaller credit unions with all those categories, so they developed this cybersecurity controls category explicitly for use in that small credit union exam program. But for everybody else, it's blended throughout. That cybersecurity concern is blended throughout. So these are essentially these categories or domains that contain the next level in our hierarchy, that contain the next the parts and pieces and moving parts of our exam program, and those are known as statements. And again, these are, if you're familiar with the CAT or the ASET, you'll recognize these declarative statements. And we often call them questions. How many questions are involved? And I do that too. There's so many questions on the CAT, there's so many questions on the ASET, but they're really statements that are simply deemed true or false in the course of your exam. So the small credit union exam program, the SCUIP, I'm sorry, I keep saying that in a silly way, I can't help it, is comprised of 43 statements. Pretty brief, pretty straightforward, just very concise, gets down to the nitty-gritty. The core for everybody else is comprised of 67 statements. That's not that bad. That's pretty impressive. And then the core plus, depending on which parts and pieces your examiner may want to dive deeper into, can have as many as 284 statements or questions, whatever you want to call them. But something to highlight here, you look at 284 statements and you think, my goodness, that's going to take forever. Well, let me remind you that the ASE, just for baseline maturity, in the ASE, that you had to go through 123 statements to even assess whether you were at baseline. And for the ASE as a whole, is comprised of 494 statements or questions. When I go through the ASE or CAT with my clients, it takes 5 or 6 hours to go through that whole thing. 494 statements. So this ISE that the NCUA has come up with, to my mind, is quite impressive. It is quite refreshing. So if you look at that 284 statements number there and you start sweating a little bit and thinking, oh man, I sure hope we don't have to go through that. Just be reminded that this is pretty nice. It's pretty good. So now that we've talked about what the ISE is and how it works, and again, this is introductory. We are introducing / reintroducing ourselves to these tools. Now that you understand how the ISE was built, what influenced it, what parts and pieces make it up, and how it's applied to your credit union exam, let's talk about now what the NCUA is going to be looking for. That's always good to know. And thankfully, they tell us. Every year in January, they put out a document that says, hey, these are some key things that we're looking at. These are some key things that we are concerned about. In 2020 and 2021, obviously, a lot of things were related to the pandemic. And the NCUA said, yeah, things are rough right now, and we don't know where things are going. Here in 2024, the NCUA has highlighted several key risk areas in various areas, finance and loans and interest rates and all those sorts of things. But here for today, since we're in information security land, let's highlight some of the key risk areas that the NCUA has highlighted for 2024 within the realm of information security. So first, the NCUA has highlighted the fact that, and this is ongoing, the fact that our technology environment, our technology landscape continues to grow in complexity. Some may use the word sophistication. And that's true. We have all these really neat tools available to us now. But with all these new tools and technologies and avenues and channels come additional threats and risks and potential vulnerabilities that the bad guys are trying to exploit. So the NCUA has highlighted that, and they say that it's crucial for credit unions to establish a cybersecurity program that can adapt and evolve to these changing threats. Recognizing the importance of cybersecurity, the NCUA continues to prioritize this area. So if you feel confident that you can speak intelligently about your credit union's cybersecurity or information security program, great. That's awesome. You're ahead of the game. Know that this year and in the future, the NCUA is going to continue to hammer this area. Show me your information security program. Show me your cybersecurity program. Show me what you're doing. Show me what you have. Show me when you were last audited, what controls passed, what controls failed. This is, of course, this is super important. And this is a perennial topic that is not going to go away. As long as we have technology, we're going to need to be protecting it. Another key risk area that the NCUA has highlighted for this year is incident notification. This has been a hot issue for the past few years as well, with all the regulators coming out with their various incident notification rules. The NCUA is no different. In this 2024 supervisory priorities letter, they say that the NCUA has also implemented a new cyber incident notification reporting rule, which was effective September 1st of 2023, so just a few months ago, mandating that federally insured credit unions swiftly, within 72 hours, notify the NCUA after you reasonably believe that you've had a reportable cyber incident. And they have criteria describing what is a reportable cyber incident. And further, you should also notify the NCUA if one of your vendors has experienced a cyber incident that affects your credit union. So not only incidents within your walls, but if a vendor that you rely on has had a security incident, you need to notify the NCUA as well. And the NCUA has made that information available. They have guidelines as to what constitutes a reportable incident and how to go about reporting that. But this is one of their key topics this year. So if your incident notification game is a little weak or unsteady, or you're not quite sure what that's supposed to look like, this would be an area to spend some time and attention on. Check your incident response policies, make sure that they reflect this new language, these new requirements, and make sure that you are, in fact, in real life, complying with those requirements. And finally, for a nerdy Harry Potter quote, constant vigilance. Professor Moody, you may remember, says, constant vigilance. The NCUA says that credit unions are strongly advised to maintain a high level of vigilance and continually enhance your ability to respond to these evolving threats. The bad guys don't rest. The bad guys are always trying to one-up each other and achieve these exploits that nobody else has before. They're also trying to achieve the really easy, low-hanging fruit exploits that they don't even have to get out of bed to do these things. Man, they're going to take advantage of those as well. We need to be on guard. It's easy to get into just normal daily operations, focusing on just taking care of our members and taking care of our employees and just engaging in our daily business, and forgetting that there are lions prowling around out there just looking for something to kill and eat. You may think that you're a little fish and you're not attracting any attention. Yes, you are. Just because you're small or just because you're obscure or in your mind inconsequential doesn't mean anything. Those bad guys are looking for any sort of thing that they can exploit. They've got robots out there scanning the internet for vulnerabilities. There are scanners that are poking and prodding at every website and every network out there in the world, just seeing if you have this vulnerability available that I can exploit. So we do need to maintain constant vigilance. And finally, I want to leave us with some resources. We talked about those influencers that fed into the making of the ISE. And I want to highlight some of those again here, as well as some additional resources that you may find helpful. And I'm not putting the web addresses, the internet addresses, just because it's a bunch of gobbledygook on a screen like this. But I want to tell you the names of these things, and you can very easily find them by searching for them. So we have several resources from the NCUA. The first is their Information Security Examination and Cybersecurity Assessment Program. They have a whole page devoted to the ISE and the ASET. And then separately, they have another page related to the ASET. And that's where the quote, completely voluntary language is. And it is voluntary, but your examiners are going to want to see your cybersecurity self-assessment. whether you use the ASET or some other resource. And they highlight other resources on that page. They say, hey, you don't have to use the ASET. Here's some other things you could use. But they are going to want to see that you are assessing your cybersecurity maturity, the state of your cybersecurity program. What we were just looking at earlier, these supervisory priority letters that the NCUA puts out in January of every year. Very easy to find those. Just search for 2024 supervisory priorities, NCUA, and it'll pull that right up. They also make available their examiner's guide, the actual guide that they provide for their examiners. If you want to figure out what is going on in my examiner's mind, you can pull it up. You can pull up the guide and see what's in there. And then here we have the cyber incident notification requirements. We were just talking about that. It's really easy to find that from the NCUA and see what they require in terms of incident notification. We've got some really great resources from Tandem. You may remember I mentioned that earlier. That's one of our sister companies that produce our online suite of information security software, but they also have a really great blog where they produce excellent articles. You don't have to buy any software, but you can go in there and get some really great information. And again, our GRC content coordinator, Alyssa, I mentioned her earlier as one of our presenters. She has written some excellent articles about the ISE and ASET. One is called What to Expect in Your 2023 NCUA IT Exam. That's where she talks about the ISE officially coming into use in 2023, as well as 5 things credit unions need to know about the ISE. A lot of that information is going to be similar to what we've talked about today, but these are great resources in a blog format, in an article format that you can pull up and refer to. And she's got lots of links to these sources for all this information, all the NCUA pages, the FDIC NCUA, all those resources are linked in those articles, and it's really easy to get a hold of that information via those articles. And then finally, from the FFIEC, I would be remiss if I didn't mention the FFIEC as a resource in this land. And of course, they have their IT handbook and all the constituent booklets that make up that handbook. You can just simply search for FFIEC IT handbook, and you can pull up all the various parts and pieces that make that up. So if you want to learn about what the FFIEC has to say about business continuity management, or incident response, or information security in general, that is the source of that information that we all lean on. So I'll leave this screen here so that you can write down this information. And now with about 10 minutes remaining, I'll be happy to answer any questions or clarify anything that you have for me.
Thanks, Joseph. Does anyone have any questions? I didn't see any come in during the presentation, but if you do have any, this would be the time to take advantage of Joseph being here.
That's right.
Joseph, this we'll have you back on the 22nd to talk about the ASET, which is timely because I know that while the ISE isn't as different from the ASET as you think, it is still different, and because the ISE core procedures address things that the ASET does not. So this is timely. We hope you'll all come back for that, in a couple of weeks. And we'll hear more from Joseph.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was a great presentation. Joseph's definitely a good kickoff for ISE, and the NCUA has really has shifted a lot of different priorities. We just had a webinar a couple of weeks ago about a new focus for the NCUA, not so much in the security realm, but as it has to do with NCUA fair lending. So they're always kind of shifting gears about what's important. And so I appreciate you taking the time to be here to focus on this today. For anyone that's on, I will be in touch regarding the CE credits. We again will be meeting next May 22nd at 10 a.m. It's going to be Joseph with us again. We're very grateful to have him back. And he's going to be talking about the NCUA's ASET, which is the Automated Cybersecurity Evaluation Toolbox. I'm sure you've seen the invitations come across your email. I'll continue to send those out so you can register. Joseph, thanks so much for being here today. Your presentations are always so thorough, detailed. You don't miss anything, so I really appreciate that. The slide deck is available upon request. We will have the recording put on our website probably before the end of the week. And yeah, again, we encourage you to come back to talk about the ASET with Joseph in a couple of weeks. And thank you all for being here. I do have there are two people on the call. There's Elisa. If you could email me with your last name, that would be great. There were two Lisas registered, so I'm not sure which one you are. And then there's also a caller if you want to get in touch with me, and that's just if you want to have that continuing education credit. Just let me know. And yeah, with that, Joseph, thanks for being here.
Yeah.
And I will talk to you in a couple of weeks. Enjoy all that warm weather in Texas while we're duking it out here with the cold weather. Still in New England.
We're at 90 degrees these days.
Lucky you, not us, not yet. All right, everyone. Thanks so much. Take good care. Bye, Joseph. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.